that work. And I ended up spending 5 years going into schools and redesigning them with kids and teachers. Advocacy planning, it was called. I did a park in the South Bronx, a school in the South Bronx, and I loved it. I thought that this whole notion, and we have to remember the time, of going in and empowering people to shape their own worlds in their image, not the image of the man or whomever else decided, these schools that look like prisons.
It was an interesting transitional time. I was at MIT then.
Yes.
Nancye.
Yes, Bran.
What are you doing here?
I know. What a surprise.
Exactly.
I know, I just showed up.
Yeah, turn around and
There I am. Right.
So how are you? It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. I keep thinking about starting the Metropolitan Life building, sitting around the table in my office and thinking about neoteric.
Exactly.
You know, one of Michael's many businesses that was ahead of its time.
It happens.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
You know, I've always found that interesting is, you know, we've both had the sort of gift of being in various aspects of the design world. And what's so interesting is you often get to see things at a nascent stage before anyone else does. And what percentage of them actually happen or don't happen.
Right.
And it never seems to have a direct correlation whether it was a good idea or not.
No.
It just sometimes when something is ahead of its time, the world has to catch up. Now, that's assuming you did a competent job of promoting it and doing all of that. But again, there are so many of these things that you look at that you say, well, this was the precursor of all that we have. I mean, the Apple Newton, remember the Newton?
I do.
You know, I mean, that was the right idea. But there just were a few things like wireless connectivity and a few which hadn't happened yet.
Well, you know, the history of technology is the history of people who thought of things, even artists like Da Vinci who thought of things, but there was not the technology to make it happen yet. And I remember in the early TEDs, that we remember those days when it was the Steve Jobses and Bill.
It was a great time. The TED conference was a really remarkable thing.
Remarkable thing. But I remember this idea that was floated, which is that, yes, the internet is here, but we're not going to understand the impact of the internet for another 20 years. And everyone said, people like us who didn't know said, no, the world has changed. Yes, it has, and it hasn't yet.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that so many things, like the things we think of doing, like we remember neoteric where we talked about walls that changed, right? Architecture that was mutable, right? Those things were doable, sort of.
Yeah,
but now they're quite doable.
And again, it seemed obvious and like, we'd better hurry up because everyone is going to do this in the next 10 minutes. And then, as it turned out, that wasn't quite the case. But it's so interesting to me when you look back at those things and you say, well, you know, that was a good idea.
Yes.
Still is a good idea.
Yeah.
But I also have found it fascinating that for so many of these things, there is no shortcut that you release it to the world, it escapes the world, it does something else. And then either it clicks at that time or it doesn't. And getting people's behaviors to change is the hardest thing in the world.
It's almost, I mean, so many of the things that I work on are really fundamentally about behavior change. And I mean, technology meets human, right? And the technology may be moving along, but the humans are humans. I mean, we had a very interesting conversation with Rob Califf, who was the old head of the FDA, brilliant man, scientist, doctor, and he was talking about, we're working on GLP-1s, and he was talking about the fact, and we have a big idea thinking about how do we change the paradigm from treatment to prevention. How do we get people to not get sick versus the whole system is designed to treat them once they get sick?
Sure.
And one of the things that he said, which has stuck with me, this is only a few weeks ago, was we are wired, our behavior is hardwired, and we're hardwired to do things that aren't good for us.
Exactly.
Most addictive behavior is not good for us. And we're hardwired to be addictive as creatures. So when you take, that's smoking, eating, whatever addiction you have, most, even technology addicts, games, you know, how the technologists have wired in all these little beeps and prompts and ways that you know, you just have to keep going. It's tapping into something that is innate in who we are as humans. And when you start to say, well, I'm in the business of developing weight loss drugs, but the technology, the weight loss drug isn't enough. You know, you also have to develop some healthy other habits.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And that's hard.
Well, and it's interesting because that whole class of drugs, the GLP-1s and all the related things, is really remarkable. And,
Pretty
you
remarkable.
know, it's a lifesaver, and it's, you know, but because it's so interesting that, as you point out, we like to do things that are bad for us, you know, and so forth. And when you're young,
So what?
Exactly.
Right.
And as you get older, it turns out all your numbers change. And, you know, your blood pressure starts going up, and your blood sugar starts going up, and your weight starts going up, and, you know, it
Bad
all...
cholesterol starts going up.
Exactly, triglycerides. And so the idea that there are now medications that are safe and effective, I've always thought of it as resetting the set point of how your body stabilizes its weight.
You're resetting, there are drugs now to reset your metabolic set point, which is a big deal. And we're actually working, one of our companies is working on a shot that you can take once a year, and it from the time you're 30. Now, this is all dependent on, can you predict who is going to get heart disease? Okay, if you can predict that, which you can with AI now, you can, between genetics and numbers, you can pretty much know in your 20s if you're going to be susceptible to heart disease. At 30, if you start taking this shot that we're working on, it manages your hypertension and your bad cholesterol, LDL-C. You start at 30 when you don't have hypertension and bad cholesterol, you will never get heart disease, because 80 to 90% of heart disease is lifestyle prompted. This shot once a year is your vaccine against heart disease. That's a few years out.
Yep.
I mean, that's not a lot of years out.
But boy, it sure is intimidating when you look at the billions of dollars it costs to get a drug approved and all of that, which is, my attitude is just fine, because you kind of want to know before you release these things on the world that they are safe and
I would
effective.
argue that the trillions of dollars we spend on treating people who have heart disease,
Exactly.
the billions you take to get there is a fraction, not to mention the suffering
No
and the
question.
cost on the economy of people who, forget the healthcare part, who can't get to work, you know, who can't sustain,
Well,
can't
you
pay
know,
their
this whole
bills.
concept of wellness has always been compelling,
Yes.
and nobody cares. You know,
Well, you don't care when you're 30, that's for sure. That's the
Exactly.
problem, because wellness starts young.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because our daughter, Kira, is actually quite health conscious and eats a very good diet. I think it starts with a mom who's a chef and pays attention and makes tasty, healthy foods. But a significant percentage of America doesn't have that option.
That's right.
And, you know, if you look at between the foods that kids get at home or don't get at home, fast food, what the schools do, and so forth, it's not a pretty picture.
Well, the other fact that most people don't realize, and I learned this only recently, we were working, our commercial team that's commercializing these drugs, the woman who's head of that came back and said, you do realize that if every person in America decided they would eat fresh food, there isn't enough by a lot.
Yeah, that's
So
interesting.
so that not only do we not have the habits, but we don't have access. And this notion of food deserts, where all the food that is reasonably priced is not good for you, is a real thing. I mean, when you think about what it took to get people to
I hadn't
stop
heard that term. I like
food
that term.
deserts,
Yeah,
it's applies. You know exactly what it means.
sure.
It's places where the food supply is limited, and you walk in the grocery store, and almost nothing in it is good in there is fresh or good for you.
Well, and it cascades through. I remember at McDonald's, you used to be able to get a salad.
Yeah.
Well, that was a big flop.
Right.
No
right.
one wants
No
a
one wanted it.
And I like that because I like fast food. I mean, I can tell you McDonald's, traveling all over the country, it's kind of like an oasis because it's predictable, you understand it, you can get in and out quickly. This concept of fast is actually operative. You can, dribble on yourself in the car, and things.
You can drive through.
Exactly. And so, and all of that's great. It's only one downside. You die in about 20 minutes,
Well, remember the movie,
Yeah,
Super Size Me.
But I think America is getting smarter about this. I think that by and large, now we're this far and we need to get this far, but compared to when you and I grew up, where there was no equivalent sensibility to that, where we were the generation transitioning from fresh food to fast food because fast food didn't exist before that. It just sort of arrived.
A&W root beer was about it.
Well, I remember when
Dairy
we
Queen.
would drive out to our house on Long Island, passing McDonald's, where it was 1 million sold, 100 million sold, 300 million, billion sold, 12 billion, billions and billions sold. They
Right.
stopped counting
Right.
after a certain point.
Right.
And but you could just watch that take off and the appeal. The thing which I think is, from an Epicurean perspective, tragic, is the loss of regional cuisines and foods. Because it used to be you'd go to a diner, you'd go to somewhere else, and you're in the South, you're in the North, you'd get to, oh good, let's see what grits taste like, let's do all of this. There's some of that now, but it's this much because it's all been replaced by fast food restaurants and chains.
They're all over the world.
Exactly.
It's what's interesting. If you take that to everything, I remember as a young person going to Europe and going to Rome or Milan and seeing shops that you couldn't, or Paris, you see shops you would never see anyplace else. Now you can travel the world and everything is the same. Everything's like being in a really great airport.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's a shame because there is that loss of local identity,
Local
of
identity,
cultural
ethnicity.
permanence, exactly. And so it's, it's nice to whine about this. It's the world we're in, but it's nice to see, and unfortunately, it's only by and large inexpensive high-end restaurants, but the transition that's been made to food that's grown locally and, supporting local farmers and so forth. So there is movement in the direction of sort of restoring some of that.
There is, but it's really for a very small group of people.
That's the problem.
I mean, you go for dinner and it's, in Savannah, Georgia, to a farm-to-table restaurant, and it's $50 or $60 a person. This isn't available for everybody. This is a rare.
Well, and you don't bring your family of 5 or 7 there, and
you don't
do that. So
I mean, think about all the things that aren't available to most people: the theater, culture, by and large, food. Everything has become so industrialized, and if it's special, it's expensive. It's we're getting to be more and more pulled apart. I mean, Michael loves to tell the story, and I remember this too. In the towns that we grew up in, I'm an Army brat, so that doesn't apply to me so much. But my grandparents' hometown in Oklahoma, the richest person in town and the poorest person in town looked alike. They went to the same schools, they drove the same cars, they went to the same diners or local restaurants, and there wasn't a them and us. It was everyone kind of hung out in the same places. The kids went to school together. Now, there's the world that goes here, private planes, private this, fancy restaurants. Doesn't matter if the ticket for Hamilton is $4,000. They'll get to see it. And then you have the world. And that's what people are complaining about.
Yes, well, and that widening gap between the I mean, they talk about the ultra rich, the billionaires, and the poor. But the fact is, it's pervasive. It's creeping in both directions.
It is creeping in both directions.
And, you know, the difference between upper middle class and lower middle class, it's all stretching and expanding.
So we're having different experiences of the world by a lot, and that's going to change our behavior a lot because we're not informed in the same way. We're not getting the same quality of education. We're not getting the same opportunities by a long shot. And to me, I mean, I'm on the board of trustees of a university, and I find
Which one?
The new school,
Yep.
which is 80% creative, right? It's 60% is Parsons School of Design, 20% is the College of Performing Arts, which is Mannes Jazz School and Drama School.
Mm-hmm.
And the next 20% is the original new school, which is, you know, left. Anyway, but an incredible history. But it's an incredible place, but it's a $75,000 a year tuition, not including room and board. And most US students get some percentage of scholarships, supported by international students who pay full fare. This is not an unusual scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And as the international students are less and less willing and less able to come to the US, we have less full fare people to pay for the scholarships for the rest of the people, and so the story goes. And what we're finding is the dumbing down of America because the opportunities are less and less. And if I have a list of things, a checklist, list of things I worry about, I really worry about the fact that you either have opportunity or you have no opportunity. When you talk about the pulling apart of America, we're finding our kids will do fine, but what about everybody else's kids? And we're richer for the diversity, and there just is less and less.
What built this into the great country it is was the people who came from all over the world to be part of this experiment called the United States.
Right.
And the the tacit assumption was, if you came here and contributed to this society, you'd build a better future for your kids.
Right.
It was not complicated.
No.
That was the premise.
No.
And whether it was to escape oppression, totalitarianism, you know, there were endless things that one were escaping. But what was compelling to me is that, again, this sort of split, some percentage were escaping, others were just the opposite. They were heading into the light.
That's right. That's right.
You know, so
that's right.
one of them said, I got to get out of Dodge. And the other is saying, oh, look at that big shiny thing over there.
Westward ho.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, a powerful combination. It was just like when you looked at the space age and the dawn of all of that. You had one set of people who were reaching for the stars, the idea to go explore, what are our origins, all of that, critical. You had other people that were looking at, you know, things that went beep, 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 and monkeys orbiting and saying they could do that. They could take an atomic weapon and, you know, deliver it by that mechanism. And so you had two powerful, highly motivated communities that converged together because they had a common goal, even though their motivations may have been very different. It strikes me that it's almost always those confluences between forces that end up creating something magical.
Well, you know, there's an incredible book. I love this. I remembered 20 years after reading it. Stephen Johnson's book called Where Innovation Comes From, or Where New Ideas Come From. I can't remember the exact title, but you get the drift. He said, you know, he tracked, you know, breakthroughs, Galileo, you know, Copernicus, wherever, whoever. And he found that there was one interesting commonality, which is that if you take a bullseye screen and you say, in the middle of the bullseye is me and my family, my immediate family, and then the next ring out is all the other people I'm related to, and the next ring out is all my friends. What he found was that the people who had the most profound breakthroughs were people who had the most diverse group of friends.
Interesting.
Because they went from music to science to art. I mean, this is historically. And okay, so park that idea over here. Now park this idea that increasingly what gets fed to us as information, news, and content is absolutely personalized to be relevant to us. We're shaping, our world is being shaped by our choices.
Which means
and
we're
our choices,
isolating.
we're increasingly isolated from diversity. And when you take those two ideas and you put them together, you really think, if innovation means you take in a lot of different things, just what you were referring to, and you see, coral reefs are the places where most innovation comes from in the ocean because that's where the most diversity lies. If you think about that, and then you think about how isolated we're getting into our own sound chambers or echo chambers, it's a very scary future.
Yeah, it's concerning. And you wonder what it takes to have a reset and how unpleasant that's going to be.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's right. I mean, that the revolutions
War has always
or
been
catastrophes,
a good way.
right? Right.
Dark ages, you can go through. Yeah, it's, I couldn't agree more. It's concerning. And at the same time, what does one do about it? That when you have these things that are a global trajectory,
Right.
very hard to deflect those. They move because, again, it's back to what people like is not necessarily good for them. It applies to information, it applies to the rest of it.
Right.
And it's concerning also when some of the intellectual bedrock is crumbling away, such as truth.
Yes.
That used to be we didn't have alternative facts. We
were one of the few countries in the world for a while, for a few hundred years, that consistently valued truth. Where, I mean, you can look all over the world and see countries that, where the truth is manipulated.
Superman, truth, justice, and the American way.
Right. But that we are just like everybody else at this point.
Yeah, that to me is disturbing. And when you looked at the definition of trust, and what does that mean? Journalism. There used to be a concept of journalistic standards, and if you watched a news show, the presumption was it met some of these basic standards. That's out the window now. And it's out the window both the left and the right. It's, symmetrical.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I can't even, I find that both ends disturb me at this point.
Exactly. And, it's like rampant and, this, and it's violent that, and it's not constructive or useful. And we have some benefit of age, meaning we've seen this change, and we saw what Walter Cronkite. I mean, my family was a Walter Cronkite family, and we would have dinner and watch the evening news,
Absolutely.
and Walter was over there. And, when something really bad happened, like our president got shot, he cried,
Right.
landing on the moon, doing all of that. He was there with you
As a trusted source.
Trusted source, interlocutor to portions of your life. It was just, there was a trusted relationship there. There's no equivalent to that now. And we saw a series of transitions where many, not all, journalists, it's based upon what they look like. It's based upon what they sound like. Now, I understand that if you're putting someone up in front of millions of people, picking people who look good and sound good on camera would be a logical instinct, right? At the same time, it used to be that you would select those from candidates who had journalistic responsibility. Right?
Well, there's in the business that I've been working in, which is healthcare and biotech in particular, I work with a guy who's sort of become a partner in life. We started working together in the 90s. He's brilliant, and he's a MD, PhD, UK, but he came to this country, and he hates big pharma, and he decided to tilt at windmills. But one of the things that he did is he thinks a lot in a sort of intellectual academic way about big ideas. So he got into this issue of trust very big time, right before I started working with him. And he read a lot of literature on trust, the great philosophers, this and that, and he boiled it down to 4 basic elements, which everyone kind of agrees on, of how do you build trust. And there are 4 things. There's competence, consistency, transparency, and mutuality. So if you think about it, if that's your litmus test for trust, and you think about Walter Cronkite, you felt he was competent, he was consistent, he was transparent, and you always felt he had your best interests at heart, right? And I think that when I think about trust, and I think about who I trust and what I trust, you realize there's very little to trust.
Yeah. Well, yes. And these industries, and broadcast news is an industry.
Yes.
The newspaper business is an industry, have been under such chaotic pressure, whether it's from the internet and loss of revenue from classified
advertising,
ads,
right?
or declining market share versus that, they keep changing. And they generally change in survival mode rather than an intellectual high ground. For a long time, news, 50s, 60s, Edward R. Murrow and following, was considered something that was sacrosanct and the network won't mess with it. Well, those days are over.
Oh, yeah.
And now
oh, yeah.
there
right.
are entire networks
Well, the
that are
church
just...
and state thing's gone.
Exactly.
Right.
And so, therefore, when you lose a certain level of adult supervision, it's a free-for-all, and that's what we're experiencing now. But what's interesting is how kids now get their news. TikTok.
Well, again, and there's an algorithm, and it gives you what's relevant to you. So there's nothing uncomfortable going to come your way that will provoke you to think differently.
Exactly.
Right, because everything is...
No outrage, no incited,
No, you're going to get what you want.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that what's so unfortunate about that is you don't know what you want or don't want.
Well,
and so it's deciding for
you.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's not like giving the option, do you want to hear about this? It's just, it's putting filters in place so that you're just never going to see that other part of the story. It's disturbing when you see how many people listen to something which is simply wrong.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that are just
simply... like the anti-vaxxers.
Well, exactly.
I mean...
there are so many things that are just simply wrong. And this causes autism. No, it doesn't.
Well, my friend Peter Hotez from Baylor, who is on the news all the time, and he's the anti-vaxxer guy, wrote a book called Vaccines Did Not Give My Son Autism, right? I mean, none of the science supports that. None of it.
Exactly.
And try talking someone... I know people who are anti-vaxxers. You can't talk them out of it.
Well, and what's more disturbing, and my attitude is, you don't want to take a vaccine, don't take a vaccine.
Right.
Your choice. I'm not saying you should, but don't give me the rationale for why you're not taking it as if I'm supposed to listen to that when it's nonsense.
And please, if you're not going to give your kid the measles vaccine, please don't send them to school. I mean...
Well, and it's further complicated by the fact that we've reached a rather odd stage in the evolution of at least American society, because that's the only one that I'm in intimate enough contact with to say that I can understand. The ability to discern truth, to not discern truth, is based upon people's access to information. Where people are now going for authoritative information can be an influencer who knows absolutely nothing about the subject but has a broad audience and is appealing and people listen to them. What's disturbing to me is that fewer and fewer people make a distinction between science and individual opinion.
Absolutely.
And you're welcome to your opinion.
Right.
You know, and Nancye, you can say anything about anything you want, and yeah, I'll either agree with you or not agree with you. It's not the same as science.
No.
And it's particularly disturbing when you listen to people on the whole vaccine thing. For example, these scientists don't know anything. They change their minds all the time. Look at COVID.
That's my favorite,
Well,
because in fact, science is evolutionary. I mean, you
that's
learn
the
more and
whole-
more and more. The
that's the
Anthony
whole
Fauci
point.
thing, he
That's
told us the
called
wrong thing at the
it's
beginning of
working.
COVID. Yes, it's right.
And,
Exactly.
you know, they said,
Right.
don't wear masks because they thought it was a contact virus like the common cold
Yeah,
or
and
something
wipe
else.
down all your groceries, right?
Exactly. And then it turns out, no, it's aerosolized and it's airborne. Oh, great. Well, now we should wear masks. Well, you didn't know that 5 minutes into the discovery of a new virus
Right,
and so forth.
that's right.
And that's what's so important about the public health dependent upon science, is that when they get it wrong due to lack of information, or it mutated, or
That's
a
the
whole bunch of-
scientific process.
Exactly. That's
Right.
it working. And so the idea that this is held up as an example of why these people have no idea what they're talking about, you just sort of say, what is the matter with you?
Well, and that is the problem with truth to some degree. I mean, I'm in an evidence-based world. I mean, I work in an evidence-based world, and it's held to very strident standards. But having said that, a lot of truth is, what is truth, you know, on certain subjects? You know, some of it is a matter of gaining more and more experience, evidence, wisdom, you know,
Yeah.
to have a more informed opinion, which may not be evidence-based, but may be in the, I don't know, it just,
Well, and you're going to make
we don't
mistakes.
know the difference.
You do a startup. You're
Right.
going to make a set of assumptions. Some
Right.
turned out to be right. Wrong. That's
Right.
why you do this thing called pay attention.
Right, right.
And course correct.
Or fast prototyping to try things out. I mean, you know, and
And it's just like, you know, you're driving the car down the road and there's a big tree in front of you. Are you going to just keep going, or maybe you should change course
Right.
based upon the arrival of this tree?
right.
I don't know. It just that it's the devaluation of common sense
Yes.
combined with the redefinition of common sense, as if you
Right.
know this. And like I say, I'm the last person who wants to deprive someone of an individual opinion. I knew an MD, PhD, who didn't like the COVID vaccine, you know, and so forth.
There were some.
Exactly.
there were
And the
some.
answer is, okay, well, great.
Don't take it.
Maybe you're right. But, you know, based upon what I've understood about it, I'm taking it. And I've taken it every time it's come out. And reality is I've had COVID 3 or 4 times
Yeah.
because I'm always on airplanes and
Right,
always
right.
sealed in rooms with
Right,
people
right,
breathing.
right. Exactly. Cocktail parties. Drat those cocktail parties.
Exactly.
Right.
And the good news is when I've had COVID, it's been so mild that if I hadn't have tested positive,
You wouldn't have known.
it would- right. And at my age and so forth, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, rather
Yeah.
than, you know,
With
and
you.
people don't realize how many thousands of people are dying right now from COVID.
That's right.
People
Still.
act like COVID is over. It's not over. And so, now that we solved that,
Yeah. Well,
where did you grow up? I don't know much about your roots.
Army brat.
What
Yeah,
did
my
you?
grandfather was a Jewish Army officer. My father was a Jewish Army officer, and we traveled all over the world. I was born in Carmel, California, at the Japanese language school at Fort Ord, where my father was for a year learning to read, speak, and write Japanese. We then went to Japan, not unusually, so I spent my first 4 years in Tokyo.
Neat.
And then we moved back to the U.S. briefly.
Did you learn Japanese?
No, because I was
In the
6
American
months
school.
old. Right, right.
Exactly, right.
But then we came back to the U.S. briefly and then moved to Germany for 4 years. And I did learn to speak German fluently because I had a Kinderschwester who only spoke German. So we became the translators for
Was
our
your
parents.
dad in Stuttgart, or where was he stationed?
We were in a little town called Baumholder, Baumholder, near Frankfurt in the mountains. They said it was one of those places where they said where the foxes and the rabbits go to get along or something. It was really, in fact, the housing wasn't ready the first year we lived there, so we lived in a villa in the woods that only had heat on the ground floor, And so it was with 4, 5, 6 other families. And I ran into one of the young women who was a child, as I was then. Her name was Candy Early. Candy Early,
Can't argue with that.
yeah, Candy
exactly.
Early had a repeating part for decades on one of the big soaps. And at one point, I was going to visit my family in Oklahoma, which is where my family's from, and we ended up on a plane sitting next to each other. I hadn't seen her since I was 6 years old. And I don't know how it came up that we actually realized that we knew each other and that we had played together in this villa
exactly.
when we were
Yeah.
4, 5, and 6. Anyway, but so Germany, and then came back to the U.S. briefly to Lawton, Oklahoma.
Do you remember the German experience?
I remember it very well,
Did
actually.
you get back there at all?
I've been to Germany many times because I've worked in Munich and in various places, and I've been to Berlin a lot. I love Berlin.
I've done several projects there. We designed European Command, the command center in Stuttgart, and when I was building expedition vehicles,
Okay.
with Mercedes-Benz, the Unimog Group, and great guy Thomas Ritter, who owns a company called Unicat, and I've enjoyed it there. The interesting history, attractive.
I love Berlin.
Yeah,
Berlin is
Berlin's
such
a great
an
town.
interesting city
Yeah,
for many
Hamburg,
things.
It's that, and I mean, there are some moments where, for instance, you're in the countryside and you're in a local beer house or something like that, and there's some old guys over there staring at you and glaring at you, knowing you're an American, who probably believe Hitler was right and things just didn't go the way
There's always that.
it should have. But that's that much of the experience. But I've always found that some great art museums and great
for
museums
sure.
in general.
For sure. And music,
the
the
Technisch
music
Museum,
scene.
absolutely.
Kadove,
Yeah.
the first, probably one of the first food courts in department store in West Berlin, incredible. We worked on the Sony building that was built at Potsdamer Platz, right where the wall was, out of the ground. We designed all the public spaces in the ground level for when we were working with Sony. And it was, so we spent a lot of time there. And what was incredible to me about Berlin was when you moved from, we went to visit movie houses in East Berlin. When you went from old West Berlin to old East Berlin, it's like you went from full color to black and white. I mean, everything was big and tall and gray and, big housing blocks. And West Berlin was vibrant, and the music scene and the museum scene and the department store scene.
Gray is a great way to describe it. I had the same experience the first time I went to Prague, when it was still under communist rule and so forth. And that was the impression. Everything is gray concrete.
Right, that's right.
Lots of guys with machine guns and other things, which at that time, I mean, now you see it at U.S. airports, but back then you didn't.
No.
And, it was a little startling that, you're at customs and there are two guys with machine guns behind the customs guy, and you hope the paperwork, I remember I went there and
you get instantly paranoid, even though you don't know why.
Well, exactly. And I remember I slid, my things through. And again, it was not common to have Americans visiting there. And I had the various papers and all. He gives me a funny look and slides it back. And I'm saying, this. And he's going like this. And I'm saying, yes, And then he finally calls the supervisor and says, oh, okay. You got a lot of lectures about don't exchange money by the guys on the street corners because you get arrested 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
But it was one of the most disorienting trips that I had because nothing was in English, literally nothing.
Right.
French did you no good.
Right.
And none of the signs were comprehensible.
Right.
I said, oh, that looks familiar. Yeah, it was the word for street.
right. Which is on every sign.
Exactly.
Right?
I said, well, I'm on a trend here.
Yeah, I mean, you remind me of a story. My mother had a cousin. His name was Alexander Bardini. Bardini was the Johnny Carson of Poland. He was an actor, he was a director, and he was in he was best friends with Roman Polanski. all these Eastern European directors and actors, and he was in a number of, it was a character actor in a number of indie films in that part of the world. And he would always come to the Lincoln Film Festival. Anyway, he was stuck in Poland. He went through, he was Jewish, as my family is, and everyone left or was killed at that moment in time, except he was hidden out by a Catholic family and during the Second World War, and he ended up marrying their only daughter. It was, I think, a loveless marriage, but they were married, and they had a daughter who became a television producer. But Alexander ran a theater company, and his portrait hangs in the Vienna Opera House. He's an incredible man. So Jimmy Carter, the first time he was ever out of Poland, Jimmy Carter invited him to be a guest of the U.S. government. And they call it, it's an artistic exchange. And he ended up in a university in the South somewhere. I want to say like UNC or something. But he arrives in New York, and I'm at Parsons School of Design. And my mother said, our cousin Alexander is arriving. You have to pick him up at the airport. So I pick Alexander up at the airport. First time he's ever here. He comes, he looks like Zero Mostel, but he wears your jacket. He wears a safari jacket, shorts, and plastic sandals. And he looks like Zero Mostel. He's round with big bushy eyebrows and bald. He's adorable. And he speaks good English. And I pick him up in my little Mustang convertible, and I said, so Alexander, what do you want to see in your few days in New York? He said, I want to go to Coney Island. That's the one thing he'd heard of is Coney Island.
Hilarious.
So we go to Coney Island, and so this started a multi-year relationship. So every time he would come to the U.S. to the film festival, because this was his first time, but after that, the walls came down, and he was able to travel.
World.
But what was really interesting was to see the U.S. through his eyes, because he couldn't get medications in Poland. His wife had hypertension or one of those things, so our family would always send him the medications. They would line up for blocks to get a chicken. So we took him to he came to stay with us in the Hamptons, and we took him to the big grocery store in the Bridgehampton Commons. I can't remember, King Cullen or whatever it's called. He was completely overwhelmed.
He's never seen something
Never
like that.
seen that much stuff. I mean, he almost had like a little bit of traumatic shock.
Exactly.
And to hear him speak about this country through the eyes of an Eastern European who's born, raised, grown up, never left until he did.
Well, and half the time there was no bread, and
No
half the
bread,
time there
and
was,
you queued
fresh
for
food.
everything.
The thing which I've always thought is unfortunate about this country is how few people get to travel around the world.
Absolutely, and realize how really blessed.
How well they have it,
Yeah, yeah.
and because it is a remarkable invention. And with all the problems and all the things wrong, it works so much better than so many other places that you see. And, it's something to be proud of, but it's also something to have empathy for the fact that the whole world is not like this. And
Well, we may have gone over the edge a little. I mean, I think about, again, the healthcare system, which is the most expensive in the world and far from the best. You think about all the...
which is the best, because I hear that a lot, but I'm just curious.
I know. Well, it depends on what you're measuring. I mean, people live longer in other countries, but not because of the healthcare system.
Yeah,
Better
genes.
Better genes, better food, less pollution, less stress.
Sure.
I mean, there's so many things that contribute to dying.
Finland,
Right.
Exactly.
Then there are healthcare systems. There was a moment in which I think it was Michael Moore did that movie on Who's Got the Best Idea. I can't remember what it's called. And he goes around the world and cherry picks the part of the system that's working best. And the healthcare system he picked was in Cuba. If you have ever heard the Cuban healthcare system, I know it's certainly not the most advanced, and I suspect it's not up the list as it was probably 15 or 20 years ago. Having said that, I think there are a lot of ways you measure, and if you say that Canada has a better healthcare system or the NHS, England is better, there are single-payer systems, and there are us, which is an economic free-for-all, and then you have all sorts of models in between. And if you are there's a kind of basic standard of care that everybody gets, But if you have a really rare cancer, you'd really want to be in the U.S.
Yeah,
So
that's
it
what I've
depends.
always heard
Yeah.
and assumed, is that if there's something really wrong with you, then
And you need urgent care, and
Yeah.
you don't want to go on a list and wait for a year.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
I remember once I was sick in London and went to a hospital and so forth. I had food poisoning or something,
Mm-hmm.
but it was sufficiently peritonitis or whatever it was.
It was bad.
It might have been appendicitis, and so
Got
you
it.
don't kid around.
Right, right.
And, so how do I pay for this? Well, you don't pay for it. I said, but I'm not a citizen. Doesn't matter,
You don't pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, and, that was an eye opener that, you watch it and it's actually working.
Everybody gets a standard of care.
Yeah.
Having said that, because I work a lot with, half the company I work with is UK based, and some of them have come out of the NHS. NHS is amazing in one way and not so amazing in another. If you have something urgent, you won't get it taken care of necessarily urgently. That's part of the problem. If you want something very sophisticated that requires a rare thing, that may be a
or the
problem.
latest
But
treatment or
the
the
standard,
latest-
the basic, you're going to have better access to the standard stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's also interesting that we managed to make it the most expensive system.
I know.
And
And
you're
our
saying,
mortality,
gee, you got to work at that to be the most expensive and not the best, right?
Right.
Just,
but we are the place that everyone comes to invent new medicines, that we then supply the rest of the world, and they negotiate with us in these single payer systems to
Well,
pay less.
And then you look at the fact that if anyone anywhere in the world is really sick, they might have ended up in Switzerland.
I was
they
going to
might
say
have ended,
Switzerland, right?
That, but they usually end up here.
Here
And
or
so,
Switzerland, yeah.
Yeah, and you just sort of say, that's interesting.
But now, if you are a, what do they call them? I can't remember the concept, but it's a health tourist. There's a word for it. But if you're
getting all these new terms.
yeah, that's not it. There is a term for it, like ecotourism. There are people who go to places like, if you want to deal with your skin or anything related to my neck or whatever, you go to Korea now. Korea is, Seoul is the place. And we have a daughter who...
Wonder what they can do to me.
You look pretty good, Bran. You don't have a wrinkle on your face. But if you want to, the most
And
advanced...
you know why?
Why?
Because it's not sunshine, it's solar radiation, and I avoid it.
Yes, because you burn easily, so you never went out in the sun.
I never went out in the sun.
Right.
And, and apparently my dermatologist says this was a good thing.
Yes, it's a
because
very good
I'd be
thing.
doing a lot more work if, you hadn't. So,
Yeah.
I've just never liked, first of all, the feeling of being in the sun. A lot of people love being bathed. Not me. Yes, I'm saying I'm going to burn in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
what
So
am I-
why would I do that to myself, right?
Exactly. But it's, as I start getting more serious about the fact that I may not be 30 anymore, I go to the dermatologist, I go to the cardiologist, I go lots of ists.
I know.
A list
Don't
of,
you feel like you spend, there have been weeks when I feel like all I've done is go to see doctors.
yeah, yes. And at the same time, we had a person on here who was actually the first Black Rockette last
Oh,
week.
wow.
We spoke to
That's
her.
cool.
Lovely lady, very talented. And she got cancer, colorectal cancer, and is happy to talk about it. Happy is probably the wrong
Yeah,
word.
but willing to share her experience,
Exactly.
right?
And, she got it at exactly 50 years old, which is when the age you were supposed to start getting colonoscopies. And
Yeah.
of course, now it's 45. And if she had gotten it at 45, fortunately, they caught it early and so forth. But it's, you spend a lot of your life at doctors as you get older, and that's not a bad thing.
If you're into prevention, and again, back to there are going to be, in the very near future, if one can get over the fact that one is not immortal at the age of 20 to 30, one of the good things about AI is we really will be able to map the trajectory of our disease path at a much a younger age, which means we can start prevention at a much younger age, which means we will do the Peter Attia, the chart, which is the way we deal with disease now is we go along until we get sick, and then we have this slow decline, right? The Attia idea, which is your health span. You stay healthy, 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 and then you die, hopefully, in
Yeah,
your sleep,
exactly.
right? I mean, I'm going for the healthy, 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 die in my sleep
Right.
bit, but I think that is only possible if you start earlier.
Yeah, well, having watched both parents die from protracted illnesses,
Yeah,
there's
I don't
nothing
want to
fun
sign up
about
for that.
nothing fun about
No
that.
signing up for that, no.
You- I'd rather get run over by a garbage truck
Right,
than,
right.
but, my mom went through 8 years and my dad was about 5 years. And one of the things which I've also learned, which was a little disturbing, is that the medical system is great if you don't have much wrong with you.
Yeah,
If you do have something really bad wrong with you, it often gets it wrong. One of the other issues is if you're lucky enough to find a medication that works, which a lot of people do, you feel fine and you stop taking it. And this is a
well,
common
this is the
syndrome.
problem with all the big three. I can't remember. There's schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and severe depression are the big three. They're all tough to manage because the meds don't necessarily have no side effects, meaning the meds make you feel better, but there's also other stuff that comes with them, weight gain or whatever, right? And then when you feel better, you feel like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to take this anymore. And my friends who have kids who are struggling with these diseases, it's a nightmare.
Well, and with the proper meds, you feel normal. You don't feel medicated. You don't feel that. There's some people who stop taking meds because they feel medicated or
Right,
woozy
right,
or,
right.
dizzy. Okay. But where I've seen it happen is that people feel normal.
Right.
And they're not realizing the only reason they're
Easily.
feeling normal is this is restoring the brain chemistry
Right.
that whether they have a lack of serotonin or whatever the issue is. But it sure doesn't feel that way. It's just, well, I'm fine now. And of course, you stop taking them and it's not an instantaneous effect. I've known from a girlfriend who I lived with through this that they don't see it coming back. They don't
Right.
see, the effects of
Human
it.
condition.
Their sense is things are going wrong in their life with the people around them. And, my job sucks by this, this.
That's why, yeah.
And then eventually you'll ask a question like, are you taking your meds? And it says, well, no, I've, felt fine and all of that. I think you need to start taking your meds, because in the experiences that I've seen firsthand, their perception is it's the world and the externals that are changing, not that their perception of the externals are changing. And so, it's challenging, but
It is. But the other thing that I find way lacking in what's happened to medicine at this point in time, or the way we see health, it's so damned unsystemic, meaning that we're not reading the whole human. And it was when we had family doctors that really had country doctors who had an instinct about people and they knew their patients. And so when a patient came in, they'd sort of read the whole person. I know the technology wasn't there at that time, but I find with all this great technology, you're getting a thumb specialist, or you're getting an eye specialist, or you're getting a brain specialist, or you're getting a liver specialist, and no one's looking at you as a total picture and saying, so, how are you?
I think that's an excellent point. And it gets back to what we were talking about, the Da Vinci's and, the other folks. It used to be there was no separation between art, science, and all. It was all just knowledge.
Right, right.
But then, of course, the body of knowledge became so great that one person can't deal with that. So
Right.
we ended up with specialists.
Right.
And now it's hyper specialists
It's
where,
crazy.
And boy, the number of times that, including myself, I've been misdiagnosed because I was at the wrong specialist.
Absolutely.
Which,
That's the systems thinking that I think is missing in medicine increasingly. And we have these wonderful specialists. So Michael has a situation now, he may have talked to you about it, where both wrists are killing him, and he's been diagnosed with carpal tunnel. So he goes to our fabulous Chinese acupuncture guy in Chinatown in Manhattan. I swear by this guy. He's fabulous. He's about 80 years old and speaks a little bit of English, but he's brilliant. And Michael hadn't been to him in a while. So 2 surgeries, they're diagnosing 2 surgeries. So suggesting 2 surgeries. So he goes to him, he says, you don't have carpal tunnel, Michael. You have a bulging spine in your neck, a bulging disc in your neck. You have a cervical spine issue, because otherwise, why would you have bilateral pain exactly in both arms, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the question is, if he calls one of these carpal tunnel guys and says, my acupuncturist says, they'll say, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the advice, Mac.
Exactly. But this is what we all are dealing with now. You really have to be your own advocate, because you can't take anything anyone tells you. You have to really
Well, you have
work
to be
around the
your own
problem.
advocate, or you have to have an advocate.
Yeah,
And, that was my job with my mom.
sure.
And, the fact is, if I weren't there, she would have had a substantially more miserable
Yeah.
8 years than would have been necessary,
Right.
being, diagnosed with Alzheimer's and, sorry.
Yeah, there's nothing we
just-
can do. Just
Exactly.
go and be depressed.
Yeah, so it's, I find that, again, with the correct diagnosis and the correct experts, remarkable things are possible. But getting that correct diagnosis
I
is
think this is-
not straightforward.
I think this is a human condition problem we have, and want to bring us back out again, is that I don't think anyone is looking at anything holistically anymore. I mean, because and I think it's sort of the danger of there's so, as you just said, so much specialized knowledge that we go down these rabbit holes, and then all we see, back to Stephen Johnson, all we see is this thing, and we see a table and we say everything is a table. We see we always laugh, if you're a surgeon, everything is surgery. And I think that notion of backing up and trying to develop some sense of the whole.
Yeah.
We're not doing it in politics, we're not doing it in healthcare,
No,
we're
I
not doing
think
it in
it's-
technology, we're not doing it in AI. We're going down all these damn rabbit holes.
The thing which is interesting is both of our individual lives as designers and as our firms have had that kind of holistic approach.
Absolutely, that's what
the
we
training,
do.
it's
That's what we learn how to do.
Exactly. How did you first get interested in design?
Well, I have an undergraduate degree from Tulane in urban studies. And I had a famous relative who was a professor at Columbia and left all his papers to Columbia. They had a great urban studies department. So I applied to Columbia and got a fellowship, and my first day of class was the day of the student strikes back in the day, and in the late 60s. And I was just newly married. My husband was at law school at NYU, and I decided that I didn't want to teach, I didn't want to write, so why was I getting a PhD in urban studies? So I dropped out and went to work what could you do with a degree in urban studies? I mean, the unemployment rate was very high. I got a job as a girl, as a secretary, admin. My second job as an admin was in a design office, and I just loved what they were doing. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to redesign cities. I don't want to think about designing cities. So I applied to Parsons School of Design. Never had done anything creative, but they took me, and I graduated as valedictorian of my class of all of Parsons.
Who knew?
Yeah, who knew?
Yeah, exactly.
And I loved it. I mean, design to me, was that way of thinking holistically and problem solving. And I managed to get through the 3 full-time years again for my second undergraduate degree. But I loved Parsons. I went to Parsons from 70 to 73, which was a very interesting time to be in design school in the middle of New York City, in this country. There was so much going on, and there was so much experimentation and innovation. And I didn't end up being an urban planner or urban designer, but I did a lot of work in the city. I worked in schools, and I got a grant with a bunch of students and one of my professors from the Ford Foundation to work in mini schools in the high schools. It was an experiment to take these huge public high schools and break them down into mini schools. And we worked in mini schools redesigning them with the kids and teachers. So I started getting grants from the NEA to do that work. And I ended up spending 5 years going into schools and redesigning them with kids and teachers. Advocacy planning, it was called. I did a park in the South Bronx, a school in the South Bronx, and I loved it. I thought that this whole notion, and we have to remember the time, of going in and empowering people to shape their own worlds in their image, not the image of the man or whomever else decided, these schools that look like prisons.
It was an interesting transitional time. I was at MIT then,
Yes.
1970, and there was, at that time, a series of nascent. There was Nicholas Negroponte, who was doing
Yes.
the
Oh, I knew him.
machine.
Knew him well through Richard Werman.
Exactly, the architecture machine, and there was, Julian Beinart.
Yes.
People.
Aspen Design Conference, Julian. Yeah.
Exactly, and so, it was a time in society, a lot of turmoil, Vietnam, and so forth.
Absolutely.
Right
but
after school job required going through protesters,
yeah,
to get into buildings.
absolutely.
But it was, I thought, fascinating at the time. There was a sense that anything is possible.
And that we could change the world. We
Yes,
could change
we
the
could
world.
change the world, and that we were reinventing a lot of what came before. Now, if you had told me then this was the end of the manned space flight program for 40 or 50 years, I would have said you're out of your mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your
because
sense was it
that's
was
right.
just beginning.
Right.
And
Completely.
so it was very interesting because a lot of what we thought would happen did happen in computers and other elements. A lot of what we thought would happen didn't happen. So on one level, we got the internet. MIT, one of the first.
We
nodes,
did get the internet. Yeah.
We got computers. We got integrated search. We got all of that stuff. But so many of the things that, from a societal change of points, cities didn't change a lot. Malls changed, but that was largely because you had someone like Rouse who decided, let's put in quarry tile and flags and
Right,
planters.
right,
What
right.
was better than
Yeah.
what we
The
had.
Thompsons, Ben and Jane.
Exactly. But so I thought it was actually funny how, on one level, technology literally zoomed forward at supersonic speeds. The space age didn't, and urban planning didn't, and rediscovery of the cities. And that was when people were talking a lot about reinventing schools. That happened to some extent, charter schools, other things like that. But by and large, schools.
They didn't. It's interesting because they didn't change very much. And I remember the people that we read, Lawrence Halpern, RSVP Cycles, Hall, who did all the studies of the way people move in cities. I mean, there was a lot of such interesting stuff going on in terms of understanding how we beings actually function in public spaces, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there was so much thinking about the ways in which it was bringing all this stuff to light and to life, but we never did anything with it. It didn't result in better buildings or better cities.
We identified the problems and then did nothing.
And the opportunities, and then nothing happened.
Yeah, and it's interesting because and some of it, Negroponte's work on the architecture machine, computer-aided design and all of that.
Yeah.
30 to 40 years later, that took off. Yes, it took time for computers to become powerful enough and do things, but it gets back to the notion of cultural change. Society, it's very hard to change cultures.
It is very hard to change
And so,
cultures.
people get used to doing it one way. On a certain level, I'm convinced the way you get them to change is have enough generations die off and get replaced by younger generations that things change.
I hope so, but I worry. Maybe I think about the Beatles were my childhood, right? I went to the first Beatles concert in Washington, D.C., and I remember, it's so funny because, when you look back at the Beatles, their hair was like to here, right? I remember those long-haired guys,
exactly.
right? Long
And
hair
now
guys,
it's
right?
like,
I mean, parents didn't like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or any of those. Anyway, I think back about that. So what I'm about to say is going to sound like an old fogey. That's what I worry about. But I worry that we're not, that all the technology and the algorithms and the conspiring to deliver us the personal information, our little bubble that we live in is delivered to us based on what we've chosen and what we like. And I worry that younger generations are not as smart, and they're much more surrounded by the things that they want to be surrounded by versus the world as it is. Meaning the good, the bad, and the ugly, which we had to experience because no one was tailoring our environment for us. Now everybody gets to choose, and whether they know it or not, everything that's getting pushed at them is what they prefer. It's what is relevant to them, which I think is scary.
yeah.
And so I don't know.
Well, and the question is, are they going to be better at navigating these hurdles than we were,
Well,
or
are they
not?
going to be are they going to be able to develop the wisdom, back to Stephen Johnson, that comes from having diverse opinions in your close-in universe, being with people that aren't like you, being with ideas that aren't ideas you would have thought of or that are comfortable for you? I don't know.
It's a very interesting question. I mean, I get concerned. My daughter is 16. She's on her phone
I
constantly.
know. I'm sure.
So on one level, that's concerning. On the other level, if she hadn't have been connected to her friends that way, she wouldn't have sailed through COVID the way she did.
Of course.
I mean, all of a sudden, you can't see your friends, you can't do this, you can't do all of that. Well, she still stayed connected. So the glimmering, potentially positive light is, do they have a sense of responsibility to know how to control this stuff, even though none of that is self-evident at the moment? Do they have a filter? I remember my parents would always criticize me for how much television I watched.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
going to
that
rot
was the
my
thing.
brain. Probably did. But that's a separate story. But I have, even though the experts say you can't do it, I multitask all the time.
Me too.
I have a television on or a radio. I'm on my computer. I'll be doing 3 or 4 different things. I'm doing email and I'm doing this and also. Well, it's nice that they all say, well, you can't actually do that. I do that constantly. Now, am I deluding myself that it's more efficient or less efficient? I'm not having that dialogue with myself. I am simply doing it because
doing
that's
you.
what I'm used to.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
And so I think people do adapt. And while from my parents' perspective, the idea that how could I possibly be watching television and doing this, they clearly watched television differently than I watched television.
Well, in the 50s, in the medium is the massage or the message.
Yeah.
Marshall McLuhan said our brains will co-evolve with technology. And in fact, that's what keeps me feeling optimistic, is that my brain is not the brain of your 16-year-old daughter, because her growth pattern has been with all these things, and so she's using them very differently than I use them. And I just have to believe that it's just different. Like my parents didn't understand the Beatles. I don't understand. I mean, I find that having a distraction quiets my brain and helps me focus. So we all have to do us. But having said that, I know I'm not a digital native and that I can't understand.
You didn't grow up wired.
I didn't grow up wired.
Exactly. And, we will not understand how they do. And we'll see which
We'll
which
see.
horseman.
We'll see. The world they invent will not necessarily be the world that I would be comfortable in. But I hope that with all that said, I hope that other things, forces at work, be it global warming or countries at war or stupidity of government, doesn't limit their options.
Exactly. I ever tell you about my dinner with Marshall McLuhan?
No.
So, great friend and supporter early on of mine was Adelaide DeMonneil. And out here,
Yeah.
one of the heirs to the Schlumberger family,
Right.
fortune and so
Right.
forth, had a very big, impressive spread on the ocean, which
It's a beautiful spread, yes.
exactly, which is now Town Hall.
Right, right.
When she sold that, she gave that to Town Hall, and I think it was the single most expensive land sale at that time.
Incredible.
140 acres on the ocean.
Wow.
In, East Hampton is not that common.
Right.
So, but a lovely person, and her husband, Ted Carpenter, anthropologist, archaeologist, so forth, lots of friends. And they would do fabulous weekend dinners. She has always been an amazing host, and they were always interesting people. There was, head of the Metropolitan Museum, famous artists, writers, explorers. It was always there, and they kind of adopted me. I was like the pet, was over there, and it was great. Well, one evening, she said, "Bran, I want to talk to you because," and they had a big 20-foot long, at least, shaker table, which was the dinner in the barn. There was a barn which was restored to be this, and they lovingly restored these old buildings and moved them all together. Okay, get in there, and it turns out Margaret Mead was there that night, Marshall McLuhan, and Metropolitan Museum. Went down the list of people. A gentleman whose name I'm blanking on, who's sort of like the authority on American folk music. And, it just, some of them were regulars, some of them were there. Right. And she said, "Bran, Marshall McLuhan is here, and, I think you'd find it interesting, and you're sitting next to him. But, and I said, "Oh, fascinating," and really saying, "Well, this will be interesting." And he said, "But you should know, he just had a stroke and can't speak." Oh. So my dinner
with him was with
Marshall
a silent
McLuhan.
Marshall
There was
McLuhan.
a lot of sort of smiling and listening. And other,
oh no!
So
Oh my God! He was a god to us in the.
Well, and he had a series of immediately relevant insights.
Absolutely.
And whether right or wrong is a whole separate discussion.
It doesn't matter.
But it didn't matter. Right. And just even phrases like "the medium is the message" caused you to think differently about your relationship with media and its with the world and what was going on. And I found it interesting. I knew also at the time a number of people who were in the New York City advertising business, but all the ones that they've done series about since.
Yeah, the good one, the ones who were still thinking.
Exactly, and every time you now have a firm with initials, those were the initials.
Those were the people, right? And they were incredibly interesting people.
Fascinating, because they kind of invented this whole new
consumer
dialogue. And Bob, I'm blanking on his name. I'll put it down here. The guy who did the original Volkswagen commercials, they're going to, drive you all back to Germany. Right. But hilarious. And it was the use of humor and the use of other things. Well, this was all being invented then. Advertising didn't exist. What was fascinating to me, to your point about McLuhan's point about how you adapt to the medium, it used to be a television spot was 60 seconds long.
Right, and that seems endless now.
Now it's like a mini-series, you're watching this. And they even had 90-second commercials back then. And now 30 is normal, 15 seconds, and you get 5-second spots with doing that. So clearly,
and you get 10 in a row.
We've adapted to this new form.
Right.
And
if you look at old movies, there's one thing I told someone, we were laughing, and I don't know about this, and I said, we have to watch Now Voyager. Remember Now Voyager? What you notice when you watch an old movie is how slow it is, because we're just so used to things being fast and cuts being fast.
Yeah, and back then, exposition could have been 40 minutes. Now it's 3 minutes.
Exactly. So, and it is...
We've become Cliff's Notes.
Yeah,
Remember
we have.
Cliff's Notes,
Have you ever read The Shallows? That's the book that really... So one of my daughters, I think the one that went to Vanderbilt, had the summer reading before she went, was this Nicholas Carr, The Shallows. So The Shallows, the thesis is that we've forgotten how to think deeply, because we don't have the concentration to read long things, to take in long things, to process long things deeply, because our brains are now, quick twitch,
Yeah.
right? So the whole notion of a sprinter versus a marathon runner, we don't read 360-page books anymore and go through them and really think about them. We read the cliff notes. And what does that mean? It's again the same thing. What does that mean for us as we evolve?
Well, and thinking about it, Cliff Notes was the first sign of this happening.
Right.
How many people read the Cliff Notes of Ulysses but never read Ulysses?
Right. I got the point. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
I understand. Why do I need to wade through this? And that notion of life being reduced to bullet points is different than experiencing life. And I was talking to one of the people in this series, Bill Schnee, very well-known recording engineer, done half the famous albums you've heard. And we were talking about audiences and this, and is there a market for high-quality audio?
Right.
There's this rarefied audiophile, high-end audio where people will spend thousands, billions on a hi-fi system. And some of it transitions into sculpture, some of it transitions into silliness, some of it transitions into an insatiable urge to capture the essence of what live performance is and so forth. But of course, that's this percentage here. And then there was the 1950s hi-fi crowd, which was kind of very popular. And then, we had companies like Fisher and Marantz and all of that.
That nice big cabinet work with the little, you open the top and
Exactly.
And
And a sense of
vinyl was
ceremony
in
of
it.
how you get
exactly.
your music and find materials and such. But, talking about it this day, how many kids have ever heard live music, acoustic music, and all of that? And the answer is very, very few.
And if they have, it's been in a stadium where the sound is crap.
Exactly.
Right.
And then we were sort of just extrapolating this. How many of them have ever heard speakers? Because the majority of them listen on earbuds or the other stuff.
That's right.
And there are so many people who've never seen a movie on anything bigger than this or on their laptop. And again, I came from a business where Panavision, Ultra Panavision, Super Panavision, IMAX.
Yes, exactly.
Let's double the IMAX. Let's do the rest of it. And there are a handful of those things happening. And the resurgence of interest in something like the Sphere in Vegas,
yes,
which, is quite the thing.
One of my colleagues has been there, goes about 10 times a year to the Sphere.
Yep.
Sees everything there.
Well, I thought it was very interesting because they had endless problems getting it to work. And, their budget went from, 800 million to 2.5 billion or,
Really? I mean,
it is.
I would love to go. I have never experienced it.
Well, it will be interesting to see if their economic model works. But that's a separate discussion. As with introducing most new technologies, does it work? But it's very well done. And the visual quality with the right source material, and it's variable, is spectacular.
Right.
And the experience of the space and the sound and all of it is a great experience. I mean, my hat's off to them, really well done. And as you know, I'm picky about
I know
these
you are.
kinds
You're
of
quite
things.
a.
So this is really good. Now, what will evolve? How do you make enough money with it so as a art form or a medium it survives?
Right.
Because the question is, I'm producing for a whole new medium, just as producing for IMAX is more expensive than shooting on your iPhone.
Course. Yeah.
Producing for the Sphere is more expensive than IMAX. And how do you mix it, and how do you do the sound, and how do you do the other things? Well, hopefully they work that out. But I think it's a very interesting preview of what could be the next generation of immersive experiences. In a way, I mean, a lot of quote unquote immersive experiences are just silly.
Oh, I have a friend who is in that world. Do you know Darcy Pollock?
No, I don't think so.
She worked with Bob Weiss.
I know Bob well.
You know Bob well, but she worked at Disney in strategy for many years as a result of Bob. But she then became head of something related to that at MGM, and
Might have met her.
you might have met her along the way. She's wonderful. Her husband, Jeff Pollock, is in the music business. They live in LA. Anyway,
No relation to Jackson.
no relation to Jackson.
Exactly.
But we went to a lot. Whenever she comes, she goes to everything, and she sees everything. And when she comes to New York, I'm her companion, and I've gone to see a lot of immersive things. Most of them are really silly.
It's like somebody hangs some sheets up with a projection and a
exactly.
wind machine, and you're saying,
Yeah,
isn't this
it's an
thrilling?
immersive experience, right?
No.
What? Right.
Well, and I remember, I won't slander the particular organization because I don't remember which it was, but Robin and Kira went to one of the artists' immersive experience things that have been popular and all. And, bored her to tears and,
I've been to a few where I thought,
get me
really?
out of here.
Right,
It was just this. Apparently there are some audiences for these things, but, there is this concept of quality which can be relevant in these things. But when you get a new medium, when film was created, people would cringe when train came at them, this is Cinerama, other stuff. At the beginning of the film business, you could do anything, and the novelty was sufficient to interest people. And then all of a sudden, you needed story and content and actors and drama and so forth. And then every time there was a disruption, I mean, the famous, Harry Warner, I guess, quote, why would I ever want to hear an actor talk?
Right.
When talkies were introduced.
Right.
Al Jolson, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was.
I think it was.
Yeah.
The first talking picture. And
some of them you wouldn't want to hear talk.
yes, well,
right?
there was that
then.
actors who sound,
Right, exactly.
But it changes and it evolves, and I think that that's the fun part from a design perspective. Is how do you look at these things with a critical eye? How do you not be too quick to dismiss them because they're different than your experience?
Right.
And that's the disadvantage you and I have when talking to gamers, because not having grown up in that world.
Right, that's right.
Yes, we can play a game and we can do that, but we weren't wired to do that.
No,
they're
to
wired
be addicted to it.
And is it good or bad? It just is. It's not an appropriate value judgment.
But it is interesting. This is sort of slightly afield, but I'll tell you a little story. We have a next door neighbor who moved to Florida, and his daughter, grown daughter, had a difficult marriage, moved in with him with their grandson. So the grandson is now, let's call him 10, and they live in Sarasota, Florida. And the grandson comes home every day from school without a friend, goes to his room and gets on his multiplayer platform and plays with his friends who are in their bedrooms alone, right? And they said, we keep and they have a boat out front, right? These wealthy people with a beautiful house with a boat out front. They say, bring your friends over. Let's go out on the boat. No, we're going to sit in our room. We're busy. We're sitting in our rooms by ourselves. Very little social contact. I mean, I know this sounds like an old fart again saying, it was better in the day when we used to go out the back door and come back at dinner time. As long as we were back for dinner, they didn't worry about us. I really worry also. I mean, it's just going to be different.
Yeah, well, I mean, I look at, my daughter, and she'll be alternatively doing homework and playing a game with a friend of her in LA. She has her phone set up, so
they do it together.
They're looking at each other and they're talking to each other that way while they're doing homework on one side and while they're playing a game on another. Seems to work for them. I mean, Kira's a straight A student, and so it's hard to say, I don't like the way you're studying.
Well, look what you just said about yourself. I mean, again, different brains work differently, and having said that, as generations, they're bringing in much more content all the time. And I guess the ones that are successful are doing what your daughter's doing. I just think that there is the smart ones are always going to do well, one way or another. I mean, a lot of people are going to do well. Some people are going to do well. But for the masses, for most people, I think it's leading to a kind of dysfunction and lack of social awareness and lack of embracing of the new and of different.
A lack of motivation to do anything differently than the way they're doing it. Because, I mean, motivation is so interesting, especially in young people. There are some people who are just plain self-motivated. And I've always been one of those. And I'm not proud of this or saying it's good
No.
or it's bad,
Yeah.
but I've never been bored.
Yeah,
I've
me
never
neither.
not had something to do. My problem is I have 15 things that I want to do and I have time to do 3 of them.
Right.
I mean, literally. And this has been
Yeah.
always. It just wired that way. And I say I'm not proud of this.
It's just
or
is who you
it
are.
just is. And it was interesting with Kira. She's always busy and doing other things, but she'll be engaged like this rather than I was making machines or
Right,
taking
right.
televisions apart or doing something. But it was interesting because we were talking about math and she was having some trouble with math. Trouble defined as getting a B, B
Right, right,
plus,
right,
you know,
right,
and,
right.
and all of that. And I said, well, you know, should we get a tutor or would you like someone to come in to help coach you on this? She said, you
I can do it
know,
online.
no,
right?
Dad, it just, no, she didn't even say that. It's just, you know, I haven't been taking it seriously. It hasn't really interested me. And then all of a sudden, she got interested. And whether it was a teacher introduced her to a different way of thinking about it, or she just realized it was good for something or something like that.
Or it clicked.
And then she's A's and, you
Right.
know, and so forth, and taking advanced math classes and so
Right.
forth, and enjoying it. She never liked it before.
Right, right.
And I find that interesting. My problem in school was school,
Yeah.
but if I didn't understand why I was studying something and what it's good for,
Right,
I would just not take it seriously.
right.
And I remember I had a math teacher who, you know, I said, well, why are we learning about this? Well, because it's required for the board. Well, that's not for me a great motivator. You know, well, what's it useful for? What am I going to, you know, do with it? And I found that it's interesting because the best teachers, in my experience, are the best storytellers, you know, because they can capture my imagination in a way that works. Well, sometimes the best teacher is the person who's the authority on it because you're learning from a master and other things. There's some subjects where storytelling is not helpful, probably mathematics, you know, unless they can tell me what Mr. Pythagoras used to do on the weekend that was interesting. But it strikes me that the challenge is what is the hook that engages students? And we do ourselves a disservice if we start with a community of students who are gamers and are highly engaged in this. And we're not thinking about how to use this for education, right? Because we've already got their attention. They're already focused. They're already skilled at knowing how to navigate it. Why isn't there?
Because most of their teachers don't know how to navigate it.
That's the problem.
I mean, that's why I think we're going to see a lot of things are going to change as our little digital natives grow up and they become the grown-ups and they decide how things are going to be. I hope that's what happens. I just worry about, I feel like we're dumbing down a lot because education is so uneven and mostly not very good in this country. And we're defunding it over and over and over again and pulling it in all the wrong directions. And it's stuck in a certain, you know, farm hand. You know, you go to school 9 months a year because you have to work on the farm in the summer. You know, the whole paradigm is wrong, and we
Well,
haven't rethought it at all.
And that's what's disturbing about saying, well, let's get rid of the Department of Education because we don't need some uniform standard or way of doing it. Let the states worry about it. I can't think of a worse idea than let
No.
the states worry about it.
No.
My sense is the states should absolutely be worrying about education and the standards in their state, and by all
Absolutely.
means, knock yourself out. But how do you create an overall vision for a nation
Right.
unless you have someone in authority responsible for that vision?
I agree.
Which is saying, well, you know, should we be offering Mandarin in the schools or should we be
Right.
doing this? Well, how about funding people to teach Mandarin? Odds are there are a lot of people in the world we could bring in who know how to speak Mandarin and English, and we could, you know, so I think that it is disturbing when we default to the notion that everybody's on their own and each state should figure it out and be empowered to do it. the answer is sure, but then where does the overall unifying vision come from that makes a nation a nation?
Right.
And I think that's at risk when you say, we'll just let all the local people regulate it. And by the way, it would be the same with building departments. Why do we have
It's, by the way, it's exactly why our public health is so broken. It's state by state.
Exactly. And, why do we have a uniform building code, a plumbing code? Why do we have a national electrical code? Because you'd like to think you have the same odds of either being or not being electrocuted in New York as in Wyoming.
Yeah.
Right? That when you plug the thing into the wall, you're not going to light up because they don't think grounding is necessary.
Right.
And we're saving 30% on copper by not grounding anything.
Right.
I don't understand why that point of view is either controversial or at risk.
There's always been this push-pull in this country, from regionalism, state, government, national. It's what is interesting about this country is that it's probably one of the most diverse countries geographically in the world, and where we come from. I don't know this. If you look at where we come from basically we were six different nations, and you really attributed to where the settlers that settled that area came from. So Appalachia was settled by people who had a certain value system that is still extant in Appalachia. It's said the South is the South for a reason, and so on. And you think about, well, that's what I love, is the diversity. But then there is this cultural identity part, which is, what do we stand for? Do we have a healthcare
We have higher
system?
values.
Yeah. Do we have a healthcare system that treats everybody, appropriately? Do we have an education system that gives everyone an opportunity to get up in the world? And we don't have either of those things.
Yeah, well, and the notion is, it would be nice to think we have shared beliefs, even though you individually might never execute that or exercise that. I mean, we'd like to think it's not nice to murder someone, right? Even though you've never done that or something, you believe that. And if you get mad at someone, you don't think it's okay to shoot them.
Right.
And so at a certain point, what is the high level ethos that governs a series of behaviors as an umbrella?
Well, we obviously can't agree on that at all.
Exactly.
I mean, look at freedom of choice, look at open gun carry, look at states' rights in terms of all sorts of issues like free voters, voter registrations, redistricting. I mean, we have a lot of things going on in this country that are very scary, that really have to do with the fact that we don't agree, about, and we don't have a good way anymore of adjudicating those differences.
Well, and we have this Constitution, a Bill of Rights, and a lot of people think it's outdated and we should just ignore it.
Right.
Not a good recipe for long-term consistency. But
even thinking about the areas that you and I both care about, like science and technology in different ways, when you think about what's possible, be it with gene editing, germline gene editing versus disease, the gene editing that only affects you. Think about all those kinds of things, precision medicine. There are a lot of things we can do that you love to think that there was someone good and just and fair, some group of people who were thinking about this, AI, and thinking about what is the right thing to do, what's best for us as humanity. But we don't have anybody thinking about that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I agree. So back to you. You got out of school, you love design. How did you get hired? Where did you go?
I got a job. I have a degree from Parsons in environmental design. Remember, it was the early 70s. This was a new thing. It had been the interior design department, and they pulled themselves apart and put themselves back together. And we designed things like habitats on the moon. We designed cities, parts of cities. I mean, we did industrial design, we did graphic design, we did architecture. It was a moment when all the boundaries between things were getting kind of pushed down. So when I got out of this wonderful very broad education. I was unemployable again.
Exactly.
After just like I was after college.
Highly educated.
Highly educated and highly
unemployable.
unemployable, right?
Exactly.
And so I went to work for an interior design firm because there weren't that many choices. I hated it.
Yep.
I never learned how to do reflected ceiling plan, and I still didn't know how to do one in my first job. So Michael and I had just gotten together, and we decided to start our own firm, and we modeled it on the firms of two of our role model hero couples, Charles and Ray Eames, who we were blessed to work with early in our career, and Massimo and Leila Vignelli, Michael's mentors,
Yep.
and our family friends. And so these were two design couples who really both charted new ground and were multidisciplinary. And we looked at their lives and said, we want that life. And so that's the life we built.
Not such a bad life.
No. So we started a firm that was one of the few firms in the city that went from three-dimensional design, architecture and design, to graphic design. And we did multimedia. We did those big Eamesian
remember, yeah.
multimedia stuff. And
Powers of 10.
Powers
nice
of 10,
slides.
yes, exactly. With 360, I think the largest slideshow we did was 36 slides, projector slaved together.
Yep.
Took a day to program a minute. It was craziness when I look back on it. But it was so exciting because everything we did was a discovery. Everything we did was new. Clients wanted to pay for it. So we got lots of chances to perfect our abilities. And we kept moving around doing things. And I remember at one point, our friends from Pentagram said, whenever anyone comes to our office and they want to do something weird, we always send them to you. Because we did these sort of broad, this is why we got together, right? And I think how blessed we were to be in this moment in time when there were only 10 design firms in New York City. And we had our own little niche. And it was to do work that was interesting and new. And so we did it. We started working together. That's how we actually made it work. And we worked together. Our firm existed for 53 years. And this wonderful man who I mentioned earlier, who I've worked with since the 90s, came along and said, we were sort of winding it down, and came along and said, we really need you. We have a new model for how we're going to think about health. We're going to think about prevention, not treatment. And we're starting the private equity firm. We're going to start a whole bunch of companies, and we need you inside to help us think about how we do each one of these things.
Exciting.
So the five of us who were left, they brought us all inside, and so now we work on starting up companies who are trying to think about healthcare in a new way, using, by the way, by technology. Meaning we're also inventing drugs, but thinking about drugs that are really going to change the trajectory of people's lives. And I think that it's, again, a very exciting time. But you asked me how we started. I couldn't get a job, so Michael and I started working together. So I worked for myself.
One.
Well, you did the same thing.
Yeah,
I mean, you couldn't work for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I mean, the first time I worked for anyone was when Disney bought my company.
Oh, I know.
I went along with the office furniture, basically, and
Same here. Right?
and that was interesting because never having worked for, on one level I worked for, and at the same time
You
you
have
run your own
clients, you have
firm,
plenty
you're
of-
walking for everyone,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You're
And
not
so
free.
if you don't have the ability to keep a client happy, you're
Right.
not going to be in business
That's
very
right.
long, as it turns out. Darwin,
Right.
at work. And I've got to say, those were valuable skills because
Absolutely.
learning to deal with difficult clients, not that either of us have ever had a difficult
Oh, no,
client.
never. Right.
Exactly. It's a certain skill, and
is.
it serves you well in other things in life.
It does.
I think so many people don't understand that the importance of trusted relationships with your clients and vice
You know what? I
versa.
always said, the great work we did was because of great clients. I mean, not that we weren't great, but we were as good as the client was.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing is establishing that trust in the first place, because you don't get the client and this, that. I was always reminded of a very famous, wasn't famous, was something I heard in an interview with Johnny Carson. Now, Johnny Carson had an astonishing career, multi-generational.
I love Johnny Carson, yes.
How did he appeal to you and your kids and their kids and their
Yeah.
kids. I mean, 40
And my parents, I mean, yeah.
Well, exactly. And he said, well, how does your humor transit? How do you do that? And he said, 80% of it is getting them to like you. And I think that was very important because, I think one of yours and Michael's great strengths is likable. Nice people you like to be
And
around.
you like to like people back. You have to like people to begin with if you're going to
Exactly.
be likable.
But I think so often young professionals don't understand the import of that. And that, uh, being a nice person goes a long way. And when things get tough, which on most projects,
Sooner or later,
they do.
At some point they do.
It's that trust and likability that bridges you through the rough spots. Now, again, you have to be professionally competent, and it's nice to have some
Competent,
talent.
consistent, transparent, and mutual.
Exactly.
Right?
All of that's great. But the reality is, if you don't have that trusted relationship, it's very hard to imagine how in the long run you're going to do well. And
You're not going to break new ground. I mean, because there has to be trust for you to say to someone, we've never done this before. Like when we did American Girl Place with Pleasant Rowland, no one had ever done, she couldn't get a bank loan because everyone said no one's going to come to a doll store. It's a Christmas business. It's a fourth quarter business. You're never going to be able to make money. So she said, well, I'm going to have to raise the money myself then. And essentially she and her husband started it and owned it 100%. Because no one trusted it, but
turns out to have been the right choice.
Exactly. And when we started American Girl Place, everyone said we tried. That's another long story. But when we started American Girl Place, we looked at how could we create a destination experience that would be an amazing experience for a girl between the ages of 8 and 12, 8 and 11, and a parent, father or mother or favorite aunt or grandmother, to bring her there to spend half a day.
Yeah, because otherwise it's the let's get out of here after 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we really worked at like every aspect of it, from the cafe to the play to this, that. Anyway, but this notion of no one had ever done this before. Pleasant was a rule breaker. She was a great client, and we said, I think this is what you should do. And she said, what a good idea. But and then at one point we were yelling at each other, right? When it was late and behind schedule. But having said all that, I do think it is this matter of you have to trust and respect. If you're going to do anything that's never been done before, which is the only stuff we're interested in doing, you have to bring someone along that journey with you.
Yeah, and I think that for me, excellent point. I mean, our firm is a little unusual, as was yours, but one of the ways it's unusual is that we've almost never done any of the things that we're doing. And
right.
Usually
you were inventing it all the way along.
Yeah, well, usually you go to a firm because you like the last 7 buildings they did.
Absolutely.
And you're going to have them do it. And we're exactly the opposite.
Right.
And so, at any given moment, we're designing now a control room for some nuclear reactors, and we're designing an educational facility about space. And, we're talking about how could you design a series of mall experiences to teach people about nutrition and so forth. So it would be fun and engaging. You can feed them, but teach them about food and health and nutrition without them knowing they're being taught, which is always part of it. And, we're redesigning 2 major corporate campuses for innovation and to make it feel to people like, this isn't a 1960s firm, but if I walk into Apple, I walk into Google, I walk into this place, it all feels like, gee, I'd like to be here.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because, again, we love projects we've never done before, but we've managed over the years to build up a diverse enough body of work so that people come to visit and they get it and they say, oh, well, gee,
if you've done that, you could probably do this.
They could probably do this. But it takes time to build that credibility.
It
and,
does.
We've over the years lost work to major firms because they come with the perspective, we want something brand new and creative and original. but show us 5 examples.
Exactly. You've done this
Exact-
before, right?
Right, exactly. And you're sort of saying, what is wrong with this picture? But you can't argue with that. You just, sorry, it's, I also, we have an interesting problem. We've been around now 25 years.
Wow.
We just did our,
Applied Minds?
our 25-year coin.
Wow. Wow.
But
That's incredible.
now we have enough a body of work. So we started without websites and all of that, just because there's nothing about a website that's going to help our business.
No.
And because everything we do is sensitive and proprietary,
Right.
what can I put on the website
Right.
anyway? But having been around 25 years, things from 10 years ago and more, I can show
right,
now.
Right.
So that's actually, we decided to be an adult, and there's an Applied Minds website, and you can go to
I'm looking forward to going.
appliedminds.com and see us. But it's, I'm so proud of the people at the company who've been able to kind of rise to the occasion, usually with ridiculous schedules
Of course.
and other stuff like that. But it's, that's the fun, is,
That is the
how do
fun.
you engage it?
And the fun is working with people who are smart. I mean, I think that one of the things that struck me very early on was how wonderful it was to have a company that you could actually bring people in that you liked and that were smart and that you wanted to show up to work with every day, and you could afford to pay their salaries and they could afford to feed their families. And there's just this wonderful thing about that's the thing I loved about being a business owner.
Yeah, and you can create a set of realities. I mean, the thing which is interesting about being in business, or terrifying, depending upon your perspective, is you're responsible for all of these people.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting, because if you had to overgeneralize, the typical reaction is, on one level, these people are getting rich off of our hard work. On the other level, I'm going to lose my house. My child won't be able to go to college,
Right.
and all of
Right,
this if this goes wrong.
Right.
And so there's a certain asymmetry between owning a company
Yes.
and working at a
I
company.
know. There's
I'm sure
totally
you've noticed
true.
this.
I've noticed this.
Because
Yes.
the fact is, you go through a variety of near-death experiences when
Absolutely.
you run a company.
Absolutely.
And it's one thing when you run a
Absolutely.
company and your nut is $20,000 a week. Well,
Right.
you have to make $20,000 a
right.
week.
21,000 preferably.
Well, exactly. And at the same time, we have to make millions a month now,
Right.
to stay in business. So it's difficult. But you mentioned that because I've always had only 3 really basic rules of business, and they were, learned along the way. The first is, and it starts with a presence. Only work with people you like. Because, and I learned this a long time ago, it never gets better than the first day.
No, absolutely.
Now, if it's
Absolutely.
great the first day, you can build on it. If it sucks the first day, I guarantee you it's downhill, from there. So only
Absolutely.
work with people that you like. Do work that not only can you be proud of, but you'd like your kids to be proud of, right? That you've done something.
That is the test.
You made the world a little better than the way you found it. You
Right.
did this, you improved it. And again, it doesn't mean that everything has to be groundbreaking, but just,
Right.
Let's have forward motion here. And I hate terms like world class, this, that, and all that. But you want to do something that you, by your own standards, look at and say, yeah, that was pretty good.
Right.
Having said that, I've never worked on a project that couldn't have been better.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was just thinking when you were saying that, I'm always the last person who doesn't see, the flaws.
Exactly. And
Right.
so, it's that. And then the third, to your earlier point, I've learned that it's good to make more money than you spend.
Yes.
And,
Yes. Because living well is part of the payoff and the reward for working really hard to make this
exactly.
and taking the risk.
And hard work is great. And I thought actually one of the better school commencement speeches I've heard was from my friend Ashton Kutcher.
Oh,
And he was talking about hard work and,
Yeah.
what it takes to learn to work hard and so on. And it's important
Yeah.
because you're never really going to know what you're capable of until you learn to do that. And it doesn't come naturally for most people. You have to, one of the things which I think is unfortunate is the way I learned almost everything was by being an apprentice and, working for nothing. I'll
That's
sweep the
right.
floors. Just
Yeah,
let me
yeah,
in. Let me see what it
yeah.
is. And then they find out, well, you could do a little more than sweep the floors. You can
Right.
be useful. Or, maybe we should pay the kid, something.
A few bucks. Yeah.
Exactly. Can't do that anymore. The David Letterman ruling, that this is abusive and so on. And I think it completely misses the point.
I do too.
And it has cheated a lot of people out of entries into many of these careers where you get it by hanging around. And why shouldn't they be paid? Because they don't know enough to be paid. And if you're responsible for the company, how much money can you spend on things that don't directly go
Right.
into the product you're creating for your customers? And so typically in many design companies, in theater, in film, can I just hang around
Yeah.
and, learn? And the answer is sure, kid,
We've taken in, I can't tell you how many friends call and say, can she just follow you for a week or two? Just so
exactly.
she gets a feeling for what this experience, because what happens now is everyone is totally focused, if they're smart at all, getting into college. So they're doing everything they can not to learn, not to grow, not to experiment, but to get into college. So then they get into college. Now they're working to get, I don't know what the next thing is. And so we're all so focused, we're not playing anymore, we're not
Yeah,
experimenting
and it's
anymore.
concerning.
Yeah, I
But it's
agree.
the reality of where we are. I live in hope that my daughter, as well as all students, can find the right place where they can discover their passion, and whether for you, the right place, which was, working in a design firm as a receptionist,
Right.
but somewhere you have to discover.
I mean, that's like the free internship. I happened to get paid for it, but that was where I saw them doing this thing. I never would have known what this was, what design was, unless I'd been a secretary in a design firm, right? And I think so much. And our older daughter has had a really interesting career path. I'm sure Michael must have talked about it, but she runs Pharrell Williams Auction House now, and she sort of fell into uh, the auction world because a friend of hers invented the secondary handbag market, the Hermes handbag. He invented it when he was a kid. He was the entrepreneur.
Someday we have to talk about ladies and handbags because speaking as a male member of society, it is incomprehensible.
Well, by the way, when she was at Christie's for 10 years, she started the department there. Um, a lot of her, because she was on Squawk Box once talking about the value of investing in Hermes handbags. They hold their value better than most other things you would invest in, including stocks and bonds, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah, so she had a lot of very wealthy men collectors who collected Hermes handbags, sold, resold, right? So
Who knew?
who
Exactly.
knew? Who knew? But she was a sociology major in college and thought she wanted to work in women's prisons, and one thing led to another, and she got a job at one auction house and then another one, and then now she's running her own thing. But having said that, she's had this career path that was just following one opportunity after the other. One thing led to the other. She found something she was good at, that she loved, not what she expected to find. And I think that's what seems like it's getting harder and harder. Same thing happened to me.
Mhm.
I think the same thing probably
Yeah.
happened to you. It just seems harder now.
Well, I've never been qualified for any job
Me
I've had.
neither.
I mean, it's just
Right,
like
right.
someone saw this. Well, can you do this?
Right. Yeah,
Sure.
sure. Why not?
How hard
Right,
can
right,
it be? Yeah,
right.
exactly. So, what makes you happy?
I love working. And I still I think about that a lot. I think one of the things I like about it is I love my brain having to go places it didn't have to go yesterday. Because I feel like it's an exercise for me. Is here's a problem, let me try to solve it. And if I look at my career, I've had tranches of things I was involved with, and it moved from one thing to the next. And I think that notion of being able to continue to evolve and
Mhm.
grow. So for me, it's working at things I haven't worked at before. That makes me happy. But I also love the opposite, which is doing nothing. And doing nothing for me is reading. I'm a voracious reader, and being with my kids
Mhm.
and traveling. But I wouldn't want to do it all the time. It's one of these things I love doing it because I don't do it all the time. I do find that personally, so you said what makes you happy, the personal satisfaction, which is maybe a little different than happy, but the thing that makes me feel connected to the world in a certain way is the muscles I use,
Mhm.
right? And it's that use of the muscles that makes me feel like right with the world. And I think that there's no shortcut to how you develop them. You have to put yourself to the task of using them. And if you never have the chance, you never develop the muscle, I don't know what, I think that's the lost part.
I agree. It's, you have to have hit your stride to understand what that feels like.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
the question is, do you use that as a platform from which to grow? Or are you just reflecting upon loss of that, which happens for
right.
life being life reasons,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Also, this stage of life, the one that I'm in, you're a little younger than I am, but the one that I'm in is very different than the one that was 10 years ago. And it's different for all sorts of reasons. The obvious ones are, body, wrinkled neck, wrinkles and all that.
oh,
That's
that.
all that, right? But the
Can't
other
imagine
is
what you're referring to.
I need a beard,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
It's a clip
I
on.
need a beard. But the other one is that no matter what you do, when you get to your 70s, your perspective is different than it was in your 50s and 60s because you're in your 70s. And that notion of what that perspective means for you, does it bring you peace? Does it bring you what? Does it bring you sense of loss of youth, or does
Mhm.
it bring you a kind of embracing of wisdom? I mean, how are you going to tackle that? Because a lot of the things that you got by on um, are no longer a part of your quiver. You're not part of
Yeah, exactly.
your toolkit. So now what? And I think it's the now what that is hard for people. And if the trappings of power were what you got by on, then that's a really slippery slope. But if you don't find each decade, something else. And the first four or so are fine because, you're building something, everything is new, you're getting married, you're having whatever it is you do, it's always new. Suddenly it's not.
Mhm.
And then you have to dig deep
It strikes me that what schools don't do well is prepare you for those
for life.
transitions,
Right.
just as most jobs don't well
Mm-mm,
to
mm-mm.
prepare you for transitions. You know, yeah, HR is going to talk to you for 20 minutes
Yeah,
about, you know, how
yeah,
to get a new job.
yeah.
But these can be either pleasant excursions into the next phases of your life or highly traumatic experiences, just depending upon your attitude and how you approach it.
I when you say that, I was thinking, I'm on the board of trustees, a board of directors of Hallmark. I
Mhm.
have been for decades, and they do an incredibly good, what's an incredibly well-run company, but they do an incredible job of thinking about the experience of good people and how to move them around so that over time they get various experiences that lead them to growth in various ways. And I think about this is all the short-termism, as it's been defined lately, is that we don't think about our responsibilities as grown-ups, either in business or in life, of helping people to have various experiences so that those various experiences lead to insight, lead to wisdom, lead to the ability to be resilient and to make changes and to see things holistically. It's a process. You don't get it by this. You get it by putting yourself out there in the world. It's why both of our careers have been, I think, wonderful for us and make us able to deal with where we are now, is
Mhm.
that we've seen so many things horizontally. We've had so many different experiences that when people say, "Oh, that's so wide," well, it's not. I've been able to work in different kinds of companies at different levels on different problems that have different constituent elements to them that I've had to learn about. So by the time I get 55 years later into this, it's like I really can think around a problem because I've tried to solve so many ones in so many different
Mhm.
ways. And I think we're not thinking, businesses aren't thinking anymore about that because they think I'm going to have 10 of these, I'm going to pick one of them, and if that one doesn't work, I'll pick another one. In terms of humans, We're not thinking about developing humans. We're not thinking about what it is to
That's a great point.
give people different experiences.
And people are looking for instantaneous solutions.
Right,
One, where what they need is a process, not a solution.
right,
They need a process that will get them to their solution
right.
rather than being told what the answer is, which gets back to the issue that a very high percentage of clients need help in asking the right
Oh,
question.
always. I mean,
And
that was the first, you know, there's a wonderful man. When I was on the board at one of the big ad agencies, there was a guy who said, we get so used to solving the wrong problem precisely. And I always think about
that's
that.
seldom the great solution.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, we're solving the wrong problem to begin with. Yes, exactly. I
Yeah,
couldn't agree
and
more.
it just, if more people could understand that, they'd have an easier time of it. I have
Yeah.
one final question
Yes.
for you. When is it we're supposed to feel like adults?
Hopefully never.
Have you ever had the experience of feeling like an adult? I never have.
I don't know what being an adult means, but I remember once there's someone with grandmother's talking to her granddaughter. This is a true story, and said, "You'll grow up and you'll have a wonderful life." And this little girl says, "I never want to grow up." And she says, "Why don't you want to grow up?" She said, "I don't want to have to wear black."
That's
Right?
perfect.
And I think that the reason not to grow up is I never want to lose my curiosity.
Well, and
I
that,
had a mother who died at 101 and a half,
Mhm.
who never lost her complete joy of discovery, you know?
well, and that childlike act of discovery. I
Yeah,
was talking to Michael about this. One of the things that, I love being a daddy
yeah.
or a dad, or a hey you, depending
Yeah,
upon
right,
where we
right.
are in the
Or an
relationship.
F you.
Exactly.
Right.
But what is interesting to me was my daughter, she hadn't been walking for that long, and we would go for walks in the park. So
Right.
we're in a walk in the park. And all of a sudden, she takes off like a bat out of hell in a direction because she sees something. Now, is she getting ready to be eaten by a dog? Is
Right,
it,
right.
is this? And when your child decides to move quickly, once they learn how to do it, they can get themselves in a lot of trouble before you get to them.
Right. Off a
And she
cliff.
went over and she squat down on the ground and she was transfixed at a little teeny purple flower
Mhm.
about this big,
Mhm.
which she saw from 20 feet away and all of that. And she just had to be there. And she didn't pick it and she didn't pluck it. But, she was just looking at it and admiring it and looked up at me and smiling at it and pointing to it and so forth. And, that childlike moment of discovery, isn't that what design is really all about?
Oh, yeah.
And on one level, it's the series of discoveries you go through as you're developing your sense of self and the world and what works and what doesn't, what's right. But then that act of being able to bring something new into the world that you've never seen before, that nobody else has ever seen before, maybe, uh, that's a special privilege, which is so exciting.
It is, and it's for me, it's always been the journey. I know it sounds sort of hackneyed, but the truth is that I love the process. And I remember when our daughter was a nationally ranked equestrian and rode from 5 to 18. And I remember when she made the transition into A shows, right? The first A show she went to, she was doing B and C shows, which were much less competitive. And we went to this big A show, and she was winning everything in the B and C shows. And suddenly she's in the A show in the Adirondacks, and she couldn't steal a ribbon. I mean, she 12th place, she didn't make 12th place. And at the end of this first, like, oh my God, I said to her, "Do you want to go back to the B and C shows?" And she said, "Absolutely not. Someday I'm going to win these shows,"
Right,
right?
exactly.
And reason I knew she was going to do well in life is because she loved the process.
Mhm.
She loved the practicing. She loved the competing, and it didn't matter to her if she won or not. She wanted to win. She was competitive, but she didn't have to win. And I think for me, when it's all over and everyone's, whatever it was, it's like, I'm done with it. I'm on to the next thing. I love the process of
Ab-
bringing something into the world that wasn't there before.
Well, and this notion of competitiveness against people who are really good. I think that's what we've always both enjoyed, that we're
Yeah,
competing with the biggest firms and the best
absolutely.
firms and all that.
Yes.
And the fact that our little firm can win this job and they didn't,
Right, right.
is great. Also, the joy of collaborating with other top
Absolutely.
people, which when you're starting out, you're out to prove that you're better than everyone else, or at least comparable. And then it's, oh, well, this is nice, let's get, more things. But it's just like when kids get to MIT for the first time. They've often come from all over the country and world. Were the best in their class, always the smartest person in the room and such. And all of a sudden, they're not the smartest person in the room
By a lot,
anymore.
but yeah,
And
exactly.
that, that you thought you were pretty good. And then next to you is a 14-year-old kid with his dad going for his PhD because he's not allowed in the school on his own, and you're saying, maybe there's a little of that. And some people can't deal with that. And that just, is off-putting to them. I always thought it was great, and I've always thought there was a great phrase in business: A's hire A's and B's hire C's.
Right. Oh, true.
Right?
Or,
Talk
look
about a
around
lesson
you,
for our
right?
times.
Right.
Yeah,
The A guy
exactly.
is going to be your professor and the C guy is going to be your boss.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Nancye, thank you so
Thank you,
much for
Bran.
coming in and spending a
So
little
much
time to
fun.
chat.
So much fun.
Perfect.
Great. Whatever this ends up being, it's a wonderful
Well,
experience.
that was the rehearsal. Now we'll do it for real. Well, that's a cut.